Ladies, gentlemen, and tarnished of all ages, how do you feel about giving them enemies the good thrust? All while from behind the comfort of a shield, using one of the coolest looking weapon and weapon skill combinations in the game to reach a place of comfort so significant that most bosses couldn't hope to break through and even remotely slow you down. Even Radahn, as you're seeing, is actually relatively easy compared to how he is with most builds, and I would argue that his second phase is essentially built to destroy this type of build. Anything that is guarding with something that isn't basically just a great shield with full holy negation. And this still does the job as long as you know that you should dodge occasionally instead of just blocking everything, and know how to properly take advantage of the openings provided and how to sort of push fights towards having those openings being in an advantageous time as well. Past that, the only things that you need to know to actually make this work are when to stop poking so that you don't run out of stamina to actually block with, and knowing when an opening is actually big enough to use the full weapon skill, as it is actually more effective than just guard poking if you can do it safely. That said, today we're going to dive into this build from start to finish, talk about every little bit about how to put it together yourself, the weapons, the armor, the talismans, the flask upgrades, the spells, and of course the stats too, with the caveat as well that we won't be going over the location of anything that is originally from the base game of Elden Ring itself. First up then, let's talk about the weapon, and for this we want the carian thrusting shield, specifically set to heavy scaling, which we do because it reaches A strength scaling, and with us wielding it two-handed anyways, we can stop at 54 strength when leveling to hit the proper soft cap of damage scaling for this stat, as this makes it count as over 80 strength when in two hands. The shield itself comes from the storehouse back section side of Grace. Just immediately west of this, if you run past the ladder, you will find the shield being protected by a Fire Knight enemy, which is interestingly relevant to the next part because we're using this with a Fire Knight Ash of War in order to give the shield 95 fire damage after you use it as a sort of bonus that we can then buff further as well. But then also because it just looks goddamn sick when it's lit up like this on this shield with the deep red-orange hues of the Messmer flame, and it also does do good damage too, so why not? It's worth mentioning at this point that the guard poke with thrusting shields was broken until the first patch of the DLC, literally just making them not cost stamina at all to do the poke part, and this made them totally, absolutely broken and overpowered. But then that bug was fixed and people decided they weren't good anymore, sort of threw them aside, and basically today I just want to show you that they are still actually extremely good. Just, now they're good within reason, and if you build around them very particularly, just instead of being a brainless type of good. As for where to find the Ash of War then, Flame Spear comes from the Fire Knight Captain mini-boss that sits right outside of Messmer's Dark Chamber entrance on the little bridge before the Grace itself. This enemy also drops our helmet for this build, so remember that for later. Then of course you also want the seal, and any weightless one will do, as we aren't using anything that actually scales with incantation scaling, and then of course we have our armor. The helmet is the Winged Serpent Helm, which raises the damage of Fire Knight skills by 10%, which Flame Spear of course counts as. And then we have either the Rakshasa set for your other 3 slots, and a total of 6% bonus damage from doing so, or for the cost of that 6% you can wear something more fashionable to your liking, or even take advantage of our particularly high maximum equip load to put on some heftier armor to lower any damage that actually chips through the shield. And it's really your choice, just sort of depending on the boss and the situation and how you feel. Then we have our talismans, the Shard of Alexander for a 15% boost to weapon skill damage, the Spear Talisman, which boosts the damage of the thrusting counterattack mechanic, which triggers when a pierce damaging attack hits an enemy that is mid-attacking you, which works perfectly both with our guard poke strategy and with the weapon part of Flame Spear counting as a thrusting attack as well, and also having really high hyper armor on it too. Then we have the Two-Handed Talisman for a 15% boost to damage done by weapons wielded in 2 hands, and this affects everything that the weapon does except, using weapon skills. This talisman comes from the Temple Town Ruins area out to the west, and you can get this from the site of Grace of the same name by slipping through the wall and climbing up the area, but it's easier if I just sort of show you the full path like so. Past that, we have the Great Shield Talisman for a reduction to the stamina cost of guarding attacks, which helps with the longer combo strings in the expansion that we have. And there are various other ways that you could actually reconfigure your talismans depending on the actual fight that you're going for. For anything that requires less consistent guarding, you could use the Fire Scorpion Charm to boost all fire damage you do by 12%, the Godfrey Icon Talisman to boost the weapon skill specifically by 15%, or on the opposite end, you could use the Two-Headed Turtle Talisman instead of the Shard of Alexander if you're in a particularly stamina-intensive fight and want a bit more safety, or even you could just use further damage mitigation options. Then past that, we have your Wondrous Flask of Physic, and you definitely want the Flame Shrouding Cracked tier for a 20% boost to the fire damage that you do. And then your second slot sort of depends on how bold you're feeling in the moment. The technical strongest choice offensively is the Blood-Sucking tier for a 20% boost to all damage at the cost of some constant health drain, but you can counteract that a little bit with healing incantations, and this build also just kills most bosses fast enough that the drain won't do much to hurt you anyways. But that said, for anything that you want to be safer with, I'd recommend the Green Spill Crystal tier for this build for a 10% boost to your maximum stamina, as stamina very simply defines how long we can stay behind our wall of safety, and also defines how long we can keep our offense up from behind it without putting ourselves in danger. Then we have our spells for the build, the classic Golden Vow for a 15% boost to all damage that you do, and a 10% boost to your damage negation that lasts for 80 seconds. Then Flame Grant Me Strength for a 20% boost to both your physical and fire damage for 30 seconds, as well as Blessing's Boon for 8 health regen per second for 90 seconds after casting. Then finally, for the actual setup, let's talk about how to spend your levels on stats and your attributes. First up, 60 Vigor as usual to keep you from getting your head caved in a little bit too easily, then 54 Strength to hit the soft cap when wielding in both hands, 25 Faith to use our buffs, 15 Intelligence, and 13 Dexterity to reach the minimum weapon requirements, and then pretty much all of the rest into Endurance for just more stamina to guard and to poke with. Though I do put 5 points into Mind myself just for the comfort of making the buff cycle before a fight only require the 1 FP flask, though you can easily just sort of shove those into more Endurance if you don't care as much personally. And with all that covered, let's just talk about how to actually play the build, which is relatively simple on the surface, but has some important on-the-spot decision-making requirements and some decent recognition of a boss's combos too. Before entering a boss room, you want to use Blessing's Boon, which lasts 90 seconds, then Golden Vow, which lasts 80 seconds, and then use Flame Grant Me Strength for a 30-second buff. Drink an FP flask, then drink your Wondrous Flask, and then two-hand the shield before entering the boss room. Once you're inside, use the initial opening that you get from the start of a boss fight to do a nice big charged flame spear at close range, as this hits both with the projectile and the actual weapon itself for a decent pop of damage, especially if the enemy is mid-swing to trigger the counter-attack mechanic. But this also then adds the fire damage to your upcoming guard pokes too. From this point, you want to guard all incoming attacks from your boss until an opening presents itself to use the weapon skill. In between, you also want to poke from behind the guard by doing light attacks while guarding, as long as you are above around half of your bar of stamina. This threshold does change depending on the boss. Some of them you need more stamina to make sure you'll make it through a combo, some of them you need less, but basically you just have to manage your stamina so that you can keep the offense up without getting hit with your shield down at any given point. Otherwise, this creates a lot of poise damage between the constant poking and the weapon skill itself too, so you'll usually get a stagger or two on a boss throughout the fight, and those can be a good free reset point that you can actively sort of script to the fight in a way where you learn how many hits it takes to do this and try to time that at an important stage of the fight, like right after the phase transition of Radahn, as a great example of something that you can do in this exact setup that I'm using. That just about does it for today then, everyone. Just a deep dive into the Flame Spear Thrusting Shield build, made for looking sick and dealing consistent damage from a position of relative safety. This isn't a flashy build that will kill the biggest bosses in the game in 10 seconds, but it will get you past pretty much any of them with a much lower level of difficulty than most other builds in the game, all while getting to look absolutely sick while you do it too, because of the double-sided flame and thrust and shield. I hope you've all enjoyed watching this then, and hopefully you enjoy it if you use it for yourself too. Like if you liked the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.